Hello and good day. We have another guest on the Space Curious podcast. I'm your host, Terry. Space Curious podcast is sponsored by D Orbit, which is a company of Daniel Ernest Recruitment. So if you've got any recruitment activities needed, please get in touch and we'll see if we can help. My guest today is an exception. He is fantastic in all things data, space, and more. We have Frank Blau with us. He is off his record. He is focused in and around data security. And the topic we're going to speak today is the hidden language of space data, turning information into insight. Welcome and thank you for coming, Frank. Kickoff is what do you do and how do you do it for our audience listening?
Super. Yeah. So thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to sort of be on your podcast. But then my job title kind of grew up with the internet. My job title is data architect. And at the time, I sort of started to identify as a data architect and as someone who built databases, right? The job title didn't exist. We had data analysts, we had database administrators, and I've had all those titles. My resume is like that thick. So it's very thick. But this idea that I wanted to be the person who was the designer of the database, not just the user of the database, kind of grew up at the same time the data itself was exploding in the world. I remember, I always tell people the story that I had a computer at home once that had a 20 megabyte hard drive. And it was a box that sat underneath my computer, 20 megabytes. It cost me $3,000,
That
and I
is
thought, wow,
ridiculous.
there's no way I'll ever fill that, But I want to step back just a little bit about me, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't start out as a data person. I didn't even start out as a computer person. My academic background is literature and poetry and art history and all that kind of stuff. And at some point I was living with my brother at UCLA, and he had it was a Radio Shack TRS-80 computer that he was using for his job. He actually was a programmer. He wrote chess software. And
then you was talking about obviously starting from there. So if you can.
Yeah. So I ended up working for a company that built radio amplifiers because I did have a background in electronics, but I was essentially the guy that wrote the service manuals for them because I was a good writer. I understand circuit diagrams and things like that. It was a good match for me. And at one point the boss came to me and he said, we have this little thing called a computer here. You want to try it out? And I'm like, sure. It was a Kaypro CPM machine where you like folded down the front of it. And that was your keyboard. And you had a little tiny monitor in there. And so I took it home and played with it. And then I found in it had floppy disks. Didn't have a hard drive. It had floppy disks.
I remember those days.
Yeah. There was a floppy disk for this program called dBase. And I was like, curious, what is that? And to be honest, it changed my life. I sort of fell in love with this idea of data as something that you built, something that you constructed properly. At the beginning days, it was like flat files and things like that, but you could think of it as relational databases in the early days. I would have a table of customers. I would have a table of orders, and then you would link the table of the orders in the customer table, right? And it felt like, I don't know, it felt like magic to me, to be honest. It felt very creative. It was feeding my creative interests also. And so as I sort of continued being this sort of computer data guy, more and more data was being generated by the world. And you posted a question like, how much are we generating now? Literally, it's in the petabytes. I mean, it's in the zettabytes now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's insane.
And just going back to what you mentioned about the computer that cost you $3,000, was it dollars that you said? You just sparked a memory of mine. So our first computer was an Amstrad. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with Amstrad. It's a UK business entrepreneur called Alan Sugar. So he's kind of like the Richard Branson of Richard Branson. I'm trying to think of someone in the US like him, but I can't think of it anyway. So he started a computer called the Amstrad, and that was 464 64K.
Ooh, you had 64K luxury.
64K. And what sparked the smile on my face as well is you mentioned magic. And I was too young at the time, but it was my mum and my older brother. They would put all the data and code and create their own games. And I was like looking at these lines of data that they was putting in, and then they, like magic, it took them days to do. And then the next minute we're playing Snake on
Snake.
And like you said, it's like magic. So sorry, I just had to.
No, that's a great story, because I think a lot of us who got into this in the early days, we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know that computers were, for example, going to be on every single workplace. I remember taking my first Macintosh. It was one of the 128K Macs, in this big backpack into work with me every day, and setting it up and because it made my life easier at work. And everybody was like, what is this guy doing over here? And I'd be like printing out circuit diagrams and showing them how you could like connect them up without having to draw them with a pencil. I still do a lot of engineering type stuff. I still love engineering drawing and things like that, but it was really a time saver for me, but it was the data piece that got me hooked. Is when I realized a couple of things. I realized, first of all, every company has data. Customers, orders, restaurants, whatever. Everybody has data. The only question is, what are they doing with it?
Correct.
And it was only going to increase. And this is probably around 1984, something like that, 83, 84, something like that. So there was really no internet at the time. There was no connectivity. Even local area networks were kind of like a novelty. I remember showing people I don't know if you remember on the old days of Macs, you had something called Apple Talk, where you could put like a telephone wire between your two computers and you could do things,
Oh, wow. No.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. But in the back of my head, I just kept thinking, you know what? Every time I look at this, there's more. And so I really dove deep into relational databases. And the guys that invented relational technology, Codd and Date, I think they did most of their work in the 70s, but the idea of relational tables, the idea of joins, the idea of cardinality and stuff like that. The reason it felt like magic to me is because I could close my eyes and I could see these things. I could see tables in my head, and I realized not everybody can do that.
No.
and
me included, I cannot do that.
And so when I would talk to people about databases for their company, right, which is what I sort of started doing at that point, I think one of my first big projects is I was asked to write a database for a manufacturing company to manage their tools, the drill bits and all that kind of good stuff. And they had barcodes and things like that. It wasn't completely primitive, but they didn't really know how to organize it.
Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, oh my God, this is so easy. I have a crib, I have a tool, I have, it's like I saw it way before I actually wrote a single lick of code. And as I was doing this, I'm like, well, what's going to happen when we have, 100 computers connected together? That was a big number, What's going to happen? We have 1,000. And people were starting to get into networks. I was into they used to call them bulletin board services like America Online and things like that, CompuServe, The Well, all these kind of cool places where because they'll talk, but they weren't connected to each other really, right? It wasn't until probably the mid 80s, I want to say more like 87, 8, where I first was introduced to the idea of this Unix-based network that the universities used to connect, to send messages to each other, called UCP. And again, I fell in love. I was like, this is so cool. We were working on Next computers, which were Steve Jobs' company after he left Pixar.
Yes.
And he actually came to visit us. It was really cool.
Oh, really? Wow.
He was terrifying, though. It's a story for another time.
Yeah.
But it had a couple of things that really taught me a lot about computers. One was it had a 32-bit operating system, right? Which meant it could do things in a way that my old Mac could never really do.
Yeah.
But it also had a Unix kernel built into it. It had the entire Unix operating system built into it. And so if you wanted to change something, like I wanted to use the mail forwarding mechanism to send messages to my pager when the database was locked or something like that, right? Strange thing to do. But I realized all the code to do that was there.
Yes.
That's the thing about Unix. You have the whole kernel. And of course, Mac sort of adopted this idea later too. And so when it was always to me about communication, about data. And I've worked for lots of different vertical markets. I've worked in, a lot of my career has been in healthcare, both public and sort of like the insurance side of healthcare, managed care for mental health. But my real love had always been manufacturing. and is the making of stuff.
Yes.
And so at one point I was offered a job to go to work for this guy who was doing CNC machines, and he needed somebody who understood programming, but also somebody who loved machines. And it was like, this machine, you know?
Yeah.
And one of our projects at the time was for this was right after the Challenger disaster. And I don't know how much you know about the Challenger thing, why it happened, and all that kind of stuff.
Just the basics. Yeah.
It was about where they joined the cylinders together, basically, right?
Yeah.
And the cylinders weren't joined properly, right? It pinched the rubber in a way that if it got cold, it deformed, and that's why it exploded.
Right. Okay.
Long story short, obviously.
Yeah.
But this company that my friend worked for had the project to fix that problem. And they would deliver these big cylinders to us, these 90-foot tall cylinders. And we would put them on these big vertical turret lathes, you know, that spin these things really fast. And we would cut them and do all kinds of cool stuff. So that was like my first space project, you know.
Love it. And when was that? What year was that? Sorry, did you say?
This is roughly 88, something like that, I think.
Okay.
88, 89. We were working on a project called the Titan. So Titan rockets were like the rockets that were on the space shuttle and stuff like that. And we were pretty embedded with the Titan rocket program. And I had like a NASA jumpsuit. I thought I was like the coolest person in town. You know, so having a name on it, you know.
Love it.
I think I gave it away to someone to wear at a Halloween party sometime. I never saw it again. So, but you know,
it could be worth something now. Yeah,
exactly.
It disappeared.
But you know, but that was sort of like my foray into more sort of the manufacturing side of things. But in my head, it was still all about data. And I realized there was this market for sensors, like sensors that can determine vibration in a table that's spinning, you know, really high velocities, right? And if you could sense those vibrations, you would know about problems ahead of time.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
You have temperature sensors on your motors. If you could take that data, and so I realized, how does that work? How do I get a temperature, which is hot and cold, into a number, right? I mean, it seems silly now, but like I didn't know how to do that. You know, I didn't know about like analog to digital converters or anything like that. But I taught myself. I was like, I'm going to learn this stuff, you know. And
curious.
The very key. And so when you say space curious, this is totally me. You know?
Yeah.
But then,
love it.
But then I realized that this data operates differently, right? Data from sensors is different from relational data. Like data from a sensor could be coming at you at 1,000 times per second, right? Very high velocity, very small data, but very high velocity.
Yeah.
And this is where I started to form my, I would say my theme about data. And now remember, I come from a humanities background. So all this time I'm going to poetry readings, I'm writing a book, you know, all that kind of good stuff, you know. And I came across the work of Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan is very famous for having said the medium is the message back in the 70s. That is, you know, structure informs content, not the other way around. And
I'm gonna have to look that up. What was the name? Sorry,
McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan. He's the most quotable person you'll ever meet in your entire life. You'll be reading him and you'll be going, "Oh my God, I'm going to quote that. Oh my God, I'm going to quote that." And he was brilliant at seeing the future. There's a interview with McLuhan from 1967 where he was interviewed in Playboy magazine, actually, because it used to be actually a very literate magazine. If you just read this without knowing the context, you would swear he was talking about Facebook. He talks about social media. He talks about media ecology, you know, how being connected to a network changes your brain, you know, all this kind of stuff. To like, this is 1967. That's crazy, right?
Didn't even exist. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about McLuhan was a huge influence on Steve Jobs too, and the early Apple guys. And if you think about it, like now we all take this for granted, a mouse with buttons on it, right?
Yes.
At the time, it didn't exist. Right now, okay, to be fair, they copied it from Xerox PARC, and that's a whole different story, you know. But the idea that you would click and drag something on a screen as a physical motion, you know, and
I think that was mentioned in, was it Steve Jobs' autobiography? That function. That
we saw that. Like, oh, and if you click the right button, it does something different than when you click the left button. You know, and but the idea, if you look at early Apple stuff, they really drove towards what's the story that I want to tell with this thing. You know, and then make the design of the thing match the story, and as those two things start to move together, you change the world. And that's what they did. And because they had a different mindset than just, oh, it's going to be a computer, it has to be fast, all I need to do is type, blah blah blah.
Yes.
They saw that basically, oh, if I lift the computer screen up 8 inches and tilt it back 2 degrees, you're going to be able to see the screen much better, whereas no one else was thinking about that kind of stuff.
No. Again, it's down to the curious for everyone, for everything, and that's how we progress, and that's how we help the us, the person that's going to buy the end product. At the end of the day, they're almost predicting the future by the look, the feel, the ergonomics, just the product itself. It's absolutely phenomenal. With that, so obviously, this is now coming into the 90s. You're now focused on, not focused, but you're touching on the space side. Was it kind of a light bulb moment? You thought, okay, this is something that I want to do, or was it just kind of fall into it and seeing what happens, or would you now focus to get into?
There was a couple of things going on. One was, I'm 63 years old, right? So I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I grew up with the space program. I grew up with pictures of astronauts on my wall. It's like I've had posters of, moon landing photographs, and things like that. So, there is a deep love and interest in the space program, and just the whole idea that we went there, that we went to the freaking moon still blows my mind. It's like we landed in this mylar thin shell while Michael Collins was orbiting around, and then they spent a little while there, then they blasted straight up and reconnected and came home. The hell was that? And so I always had this sort of deep appreciation for that. And my stepfather was an engineer. He taught me how to use a slide rule, things like that. And so, but I always saw the space. The problem is that after Challenger, the space program took a dive.
Of course.
Really,
because
wasn't.
It's the confidence. When confidence goes, investments disappear, budgets go away, and then fear is led. So the curiosity goes, the fear rises, and then unfortunately we stop being curious and we stop innovating to grow. So that from the little that I do know, that's the
manned space program in general really took a dive, But the unmanned space program, satellites, if I showed you a graph of the number of satellites in space over time, you see it creeping up, and now it's, of course, a hockey stick. It's just,
of course. Yeah.
So I worked in a couple of different verticals during that time, worked in gaming, actually worked on the Matrix online game for a while. Always kind of sci-fi type stuff were interesting to me, get my curiosity going. I'm a big fan of like William Gibson and people like that, writers like that. But I always saw like satellites or something where it's like, if they're going to keep going, that in my mind, I'm going, this sounds like when the internet first started, it's like things are going to keep growing. So maybe I should go to understand a little bit more about that. This word that they use, telemetry, orbital mechanics, mission planning, this was a vernacular that I didn't think was open to me because I don't have a degree in engineering, right? And if you look at the people that actually did go to space, come on, these are like perfect robots of science and engineering. Even some of the current ones, like Chris Hadfield, I don't know if you've read his biography. He was the commander of the ISS for a long time, and I think he's the person who holds the record for the longest time on the ISS. If you read his biography, he never did anything wrong. It's like you got to join the Air Force. You got to become a pilot. You got to do this. And so I was like, that's never going to happen for me. The closest I ever got was I applied to go up on the space shuttle one time, and it was, of course, completely rejected. But I got a T-shirt that says I want to go on it. So that was cool.
Consolation prize.
Exactly. So I kind of like dropped back into the data side of things. And again, I sort of, kept my hand in the manufacturing side, kept my hand in sort of the tinkering side of it. And when I moved to Austria in about 10 years ago, about 2017, about 9 years ago, I was going to take any job because I wanted to be here. I really wanted to be in Austria. And I worked for a couple different companies, but none of them, what I realized is none of them were really interested in space stuff, right? This area where I live is far Western Austria. So Austria is like this long country that extends over the top of Italy. And when people think of Austria, they think of Vienna,
Yes.
Vienna is an 8-hour train ride away from me. It's a whole different world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
I'm actually an hour and a half from Zurich, I'm 2 hours from Munich, I'm 10 minutes from the Swiss and German borders and Liechtenstein, so it's all like right outside my window here. And so I started percolating this idea. Where I live in this state is called Vorarlberg. There's lots of high-tech manufacturing companies, right? We got companies that make hinges for IKEA at scale. We got companies that do really advanced textiles. We got companies that do high-speed IoT devices, electronic digital acquisition equipment. And I thought to myself, what if these companies who have this very risk-averse mindset, I don't know how many Austrians you've worked with, but they're very risk-averse, they're not really entrepreneurial in the same way that Americans are. But what if we could start bringing them to some sort of space awareness? Because all around us, 25 minutes to the north of me in Friedrichshafen is Airbus. A couple hours south of me is Leonardo in Italy. We have TELUS. We have all these, companies around. Zurich has all kinds of really cool space stuff. Munich has ISAR Aerospace, for Christ's sake, And so I started to percolate on this idea of what would it take to get my local community interested in space?
Yes.
Right. And it's still a work in progress. I'm still talking to people. Yeah, I'm talking to people at European Space Agency, for example, which sort of is like the NASA of Europe.
Yeah.
But they're also they're conservative. They're conservative, but they're also really interested in like, hey, how can we grow this? They have like they call them business incubation centers. They call them BICs.
Right.
Maybe we get a BIC going over here.
Yeah.
So where we're at today with it is I'm building partnerships. Building partnerships out with the companies. And so, for example, a textile company, if you were a textile company, how would you get interested in space? Right? Well, what I do is I show them pictures of the inside of the International Space Station. And if you see pictures of the inside of the ISS, there's fabric everywhere. And it's very high tech, very bespoke, special fabric that gets made to certain specifications. And these space stations are covered in the stuff because it protects things from moving and things like that. What if you, local high-tech company, could bid on that?
Yeah.
What we want to do is we're planning on putting together a symposium sometime, probably September, October timeframe, where we invite these people in to talk to us. We invite them in to talk to us about, space ideas that might turn them on a little bit to, I make hinges. Well, if I showed you a device that takes a CubeSat and moves it from a payload bay out to a position where it can be launched into its final orbit, and there's 400 hinges on this thing, wow. Boom, and so that's where we're at right now with it, is trying to start that awareness.
Yeah, huge revenue, huge new stream of income, a new product line, and also a new demand to create jobs as well. Obviously, I'm in the recruitment business, so that what you've developed, what you're showcasing, the education side of it as well, is, and I know you get this, but for the audience listening or watching, it's massive, because once they get it, what you're explaining to them, not only the profit's going to grow, but it's going to create a huge job market for the demand.
And we need it. I mean, I don't. You're in recruitment. The market for jobs right now is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's flat. It's very
collapsed.
Yeah, and I've posted this on LinkedIn a few times, and I think space, aerospace, anything from lunar launch, satellites, I think that's going to save the job market, because I think a lot of people will start thinking, right, okay, as you've said, I don't have to be this, a never anything wrong engineer to a pilot or to a commander in some sort of, boys club. I can be Joe Public with some sort of knowledge, experience, and work my way into, whether that is being business development, sales, whether that's HR, whether you are a geography teacher of geo, so if you're a geography teacher, maybe the job market's flat to become a geography teacher. So you go into something which is obviously huge and growing, which is satellites, etc.
Adjacent stuff. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's a huge market. And I think that one of the interesting things about it is we haven't really realized it yet, I think. We're sort of in the early days, but if you look at the growth of, say, like ESA or something like that, they're definitely growing, right? And they're doing launches, Rocket Factory in Augsburg, they're building rockets. And, we talk a lot about AI, right? We talk about how AI impacts things, and, it's definitely changed my career substantially, right? But on the other hand, like, AI can't build stuff,
Right.
AI can't assemble things. AI can't be the creative force that says, if you route this tube around this way, it's going to be 10 degrees cooler, Now, could it someday? I don't know. But I feel like the skills that go into building things are still going to be in demand.
Exactly, because we're still having to program the technology, the AI, to try and think. So it's still us in control, telling it what to do. But when it comes to the curiosity side of it, as you've said, for it to think for itself and to literally physically hold something, build something, it's obviously not there yet. I'm a fan of all sci-fi movies, so you never know what's going to happen in the next 30 years. But for now, for at least the next 10, 15 years, that's not going to happen yet. And so for now, I think creative side, the innovative side, and more of the kind of the touchy-feely side as well. But when it comes to the developing, it's crazy, because I built I can't even say I built websites now. I use a large language model. Told her what I wanted to be, then put it into the platform, and it's created websites for me.
It's crazy. So where is this, like, this idea of, like, where is the specialty now, right? What is the specialty that we're going to need? And I have kind of a radical idea about that, as I do about lots of things.
I'm waiting to come on, tell me. You got to tell me.
So I work with a program here in Austria called the Youth Entrepreneurship Week, where they bring kids in and they have them design a business, and they plan out their ideas. And I'm one of the mentors of it. So I go in and I critique their models and things like that, talk about data usually with them and things like that.
So that's the Youth
Entrepreneurship Week, YEW. Yeah. Super cool program. Yeah. And last year I gave a talk. I did the keynote speech for it. And the title of my keynote speech was, "Your analog brain is your competitive advantage." A lot of these kids, they grew up digital. If you have teenagers, we have one here, and it's like her entire life practically is digital. Her exposure to art, her exposure to, books, her exposure to everything is through sort of this digital filter. And when I talk to groups that are doing good creative design stuff, right, they're stepping outside of that a little bit. They're learning different ways of thinking. And I have I have many weird hobbies, but one of my weird hobbies is I repair typewriters.
Wow.
And I write on a typewriter. I do most of my creative writing on a typewriter. I have an Olivetti Latera 32, the best typewriter ever made.
So what year is that? What was it? Was it made?
69? I think my Latera is, but don't tell my wife, I have like 7 of them here now. So I have a Rhine medal from the 1930s on the shelf over there. I have another Olivetti from the 1950s over there. So,
and you spotting free guitars behind you as well.
Yes, I'm also a musician. So we'll talk about that in a second too, because it fits basically, right? One of the things I talk to students about is that if you're going to go into a job, let's say kids will say, "Oh, I want to be in IT," right? I'm like, okay, be a little bit more specific, because let's say you're a really good programmer. Let's say you learned Python or something like that. You've written some games and you've done some stuff, that's not the same as being able to sit down in a company and contribute. Right? And the metaphor that I use for it is a musical metaphor. I say, you have a gig, right? You got to go to your gig and you got to play. You have a band, right? Which I've had several, and it is not enough just to know the chords and the words to the song. You have to know how to do a sound check. You have to know how to check the lights with the lighting guy. You have to know how to haul in your equipment and get it set on stage, usually with there's not a lot of time to do it, You have to know how to tune between songs. You have to know how to talk between songs if that's your thing, And I call that being gig ready.
Yeah.
Right. And when I talk to the kids about this, they get it. They get it. And it's like, okay, I can tell you a couple of skills that no one is going to teach you when you go to work. You're going to have to, I expect you to know these things when your butt is in the seat, right?
Yeah.
Git, right? Yeah. Source control. I'm not going to take time to teach you Git. You need to know it, right? Docker, containers, right? APIs, and something about data, right? My career, something about data, something about SQL, to have, know something about data, And to me, those skills that represent your sit down and be productive skills have really good analogs to the analog world. Like if you can put together a band, right? And you can get 5 strangers or strange people, right? To come together in rhythm, melody, content, lyrics, and all that stuff, stand on the stage and perform it so that people will clap at the end. You can be a computer programmer, 100%.
Love it. Love that.
Because those are skills where your brain, your analog brain, has learned to, oh yeah, it's not just about the one skill, it's about the stuff around it. And so as I start trying to bring people into this space world, this is the kind of talk I give.
That's phenomenal. And just the way that you break it down in segments and then build it up and put it together speaks volumes. And and I need to say this because it literally warmed my heart when we spoke yesterday, just doing a quick intro and just to let the meet and greet when we were speaking, and we was on WhatsApp and the video was there and speaking, and your daughter came over to you and your wife came over to you, and I don't know why I said that. Your wife came over to you and give you a big hug and a kiss and what's up. It warmed my heart, and it was just like that. Normally, when someone's on like camera and they're speaking, the spouse will just like go to the other side and just like hide away. But it was kind of like the affection that was shown was just like so nice. Just what to say.
Bringing your human spirit. Bringing your human spirit into things is like, we need more of this, not less. So another weird thing from my past is I went to cooking school for 2 years at one point in my life, and there is planning a meal, a multi-course meal, right, is a lot like project management, right? Because things have to be lined up on the output, not the input. You have to know when to start the pasta to get the sauce to finish on time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a critical path. That's what we call a critical path in project management, and Gantt charts and stuff like that. A funny story is my stepfather proposed to my mother by drawing her a Gantt chart of their lives. Like when the kids would be in college, where they would live, and what his income would be and all this kind of stuff. So
I love it. So is that the mindset on that? Is that an analog mind? What did you say?
It is definitely sort of applying visual thinking to different kinds of problems. So if you think about cooking, right? Cooking is not really a lot of data. It's not a lot of like quantifiable data. Like when you're cooking shallots, for example, right? You slice them up nice and small. You do what we call a brin noir on them, and you put them in the butter, right? How do you know when your shallots are done?
Yeah.
How do you know? Like I'm asking you. So do you know how to tell when your shallots are done?
I wouldn't even have a clue.
The sound changes.
Okay.
When they start to absorb and they start to cook down, it goes from like a high pitch to a sort of sound.
Of course. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so this is like analog data, but we're going to apply it to other kinds of problems. We're going to apply it to, and again, I'll come back to data now. Is like when I'm looking at data problems, I'm really looking for what am I listening for? Is there something here? And typically it's about what you talked about earlier. It's about the story. You know, I have a project I'm working on with a friend in Seattle now, and she keeps coming to me with these really kind of, I would say, and I can solve complex data problems because I'm good at that. But what I really want to know from her every time is, what's the story?
Yes.
You know, what is the story you're trying to tell? Because you can get completely wrapped around the axle of like attributes and data models and ORM and all this kind of stuff, you know, and that's where she thought she had to be. And I was like, no, I want to hear your story about what you want to do with this.
Yeah.
You know, tell me a user story. Tell me a journey. Tell me a heroic journey, to go back to my humanities background. You know, tell me a heroic journey of the success of your tool in somebody's life.
Yeah.
You know, because then I've been doing this a long time. As you're talking, I'm visualizing the data model. I'm visualizing what needs to be done to get that to fit. Because again, it comes back to structure, right? We can tell lots of different kind of stories. If I'm going to tell a story about a sensor, for example, we call it a time story, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a when story. But if it's a story about a relationship, I might want a graph database.
Yeah.
You know, and these are the kinds of things that I'll be honest, I sometimes have a hard time getting people to see it. Like I think you probably watched my TED Talk, you know, it's like, it's about,
exactly. Yeah. And when you were speaking about that, what came to mind, I can't remember the movie. It's Robert Downey Jr. It must be Sherlock. It must be Sherlock.
Yeah,
Sherlock
probably.
Holmes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when he thinks, and when he was there was a scene when he was gonna fight, and he anticipated every move before it happened, and he was speaking about it, and it was like in his mind, but you could see it, and obviously the visuals of the cinematic movie were showing. And when you're speaking it almost reminds me of that. So when people are speaking to you, or when you're looking at something or thinking about something, not only will you just think about it, you can actually visualize it and see it in front of you. And that's a fantastic skill to have.
Did you watch the series, The Queen's Gambit, about the chess player?
That is amazing. Yeah. That
same thing, right? When she would look up at the ceiling, she would actually see it.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. So anyone listening, there's I think the show was on Netflix. It's no one's watched the Queen's Gambit. Is
so good.
Major movie to watch, not movie, series to watch. And the Queen's Gambit, I believe it's an aggressive chess move. So it's named after an aggressive chess move to obviously win the game. So a bit of a segue there, listeners. If you haven't watched this, watch the Queen's Gambit.
It's a brilliant series. Yeah. But it talks, like the Robert Downey thing, it sort of shows you that, you know, not everybody can physicalize abstract concepts, but you can teach yourself some of that by doing some of those abstract things, like starting a band. Learning how to cook, you know, writing a book. You know, if you write a book, one of the skills you have to have, I'm writing a book now, and it's a book about another book, and you have to keep track of this manuscript, right? And it has to have structure, and you have to have headings, and you have all this kind of stuff. These are valuable skills.
Yes.
This is not just writing a book and then that's it. It's like, how do I know what was in chapter 3 versus chapter 4? And am I formatting this correctly? It's like, these are skills that if you go into the workplace, they expect you to know.
Yeah. I bet it was easy for you, though. I bet it was easy for you. I'll give you one quick story, because I've written a book. One quick story. I was like, I'm going to write a book. A book. And then it was like, right, okay. A year later, the title.
Yeah, exactly. You know what you need, Arne, is you need a typewriter.
Yeah. It's completed now. It's completed. Okay. And then, but it was like literally a year after that. Right, okay, we're to start it now. We're to start it. The subtitle.
There you go. The subtitle. The dedication. The dedication. To my loving wife. Oh man, that's a success for the day. I can call it now.
So it's so and this is coming from a non-read. Obviously, I read a lot now, and I've been reading for the past like 10, 13 years. But like you said, what you're saying with me personally, teaching yourself about it and learning, and you know, people listening here as well, don't feel kind of, I don't know what word to use, scared about exploring new things, looking into space, being curious about getting into this kind of industry, because it's open for everyone. We need to talk about your TED Talk. There's a million things that we're gonna go over. We're gonna run
Part
over.
Yeah.
So your TED Talk. So for people that don't know, if you just give them a condensed version of the TED Talk,
sure.
The title, what was about, what the outcome was.
Then nobody will go watch it. No, just kidding. No, so it was about Marshall McLuhan.
Just a quick overview.
Yeah, just a quick overview. It was about the idea. So Marshall McLuhan is very famous for saying the medium is the message, right? And I took that and I applied that to data. And what that means in terms of data is I need to know about your content before I can build the structure, right? But actually, it's kind of the other way around. I need to know the stories, and then the structure tells the content. And this is a very backwards way of thinking for some people, But if I break it down into different kinds of databases, it makes sense. Like a relational database tells you a transactional story. It represents a point in time that's really important for doing like financial things, and transactional things, right? But if I want to tell a story about something happening over time, you can do that in a relational database, but it's not built for it. If I want to tell a story about, here's a whole bunch of information about Frank. He went to this school, he did this, he blah, 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 and I need to send that off to a program. Well, a document database does that really cleanly because it keeps all the information together, right? These are all just different data architectures. And what I'm asking people to do when I break this down this way is to think about, what are you doing that extends your thinking, right? What is the new thing that I'm going to learn from doing this way, right? Am I going to learn how many blue shirts were sold to, white men in Seattle on a Tuesday? It's like, that's an important question to somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself, this insight, this sort of actionable insight should be your laser focus, right? And it should be your laser focus for any kind of database you do, not just the relational ones. And so we talked today a lot about, for example, graph databases where you have nodes that connect to each other by relationships. And those relationships are really important. But if you think about Facebook, where it's not just your friends, but your friends of your friends and your friends of your friends of your friends.
Yeah.
And how you find that old girlfriend from third grade, and then you send her a message and she says, who? No, just kidding.
Yeah.
But that kind of query, we call that a recursive query, right? Where you're saying search inside of this, then inside of it. Relational databases suck at those, right? So this is why LinkedIn and Facebook, a lot of social media, they run on graph databases, because they can do those kinds of queries and again, I'll change the language for you. They can tell those kinds of stories at lightning speed, sub-second level across billions of nodes. You never have to wait to find your friends of your friends of your friends. It just shows them to you,
Exactly.
Think about how many nodes there are in that network. A relational database just couldn't do that. That's kind of the essence of my TED Talk. It's a little more esoteric than that, and I tell funny stories and things like that, but if you're interested, we'll get a link how a data architect thinks.
Yeah, we'll get a link as well. So when we post this, we'll get a link to the TED Talk, so the avid listener, viewer, can obviously get to that as well. So one thing that you have touched on, but just stating the obvious, why is data so important in space, aerospace, that sort of thing?
Well, there's a couple of things. Let's break down some of the kinds of data that we have in space, okay? Because it's not just one thing, right? There's people who are interested, for example, in the telemetry. That is sort of the information about the what and where you are. There's people interested in the sensors, like what am I taking a picture of? What am I communicating with? There's traffic management. It's a huge problem in space right now. So it breaks space from a data perspective down into layers. Okay. So one layer might be the ground station layer. That is, how do I connect to my satellite? How do I know where it is? Satellites are constantly moving around the Earth. Like if you watch, I'm a big fan of going outside and watching satellites go overhead, and that's all just telemetry, right? That's all like mission control type stuff, right? But then we have a layer above that, which is like a communications layer, right? It's like, for example, I have out on my deck, I can see, I can't really turn my camera around, but I have an antenna, and it's basically listening for satellites. The problem is I live in kind of a valley, so I don't get a ton of them. I get a lot. I get like, 800 a day. It's not like a little number, but
Wow.
But if it's really low on the horizon, you can't really get the signal to you,
Yeah.
So that's a whole world of data and space data is like,
maybe that's a signal we picked up before when we first started a different language. I could hear someone speaking, so I don't even know.
I was looking at one the other day, and it wasn't moving very fast. I was watching it based on the telemetry, and it had like this sort of linear path that wasn't like in an orbit. Like, what's going on there? It turns out it wasn't a satellite at all. It was a balloon.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Just a random, someone's actually left a balloon, or a purpose, like
it was a balloon with a data package on it, basically.
Right. Okay. Right. So it was like a proper weather balloon kind of.
Super interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So then we sort of call this the compute layer, right? This is where we need to calculate things in orbit.
Yeah.
Right? We need to do things like, how much fuel am I going to burn? How do I turn off and on the right things? That is this what we call in-orbit processing.
Mm-hmm.
And this in-orbit processing is something I'm super interested in right now. I'm actually planning a project to run on one of the Austrian satellites. And I just got approved to be an experimenter, so I can actually submit projects to them. And all I want to do is like take a picture of the Earth. They have a camera on this thing, and I want to run some calculations on it, like mass or something, but do that on the satellite, and then just send the results back down to me. As opposed to in the past, we'd send all the data back down, do all the processing down here. This idea of in-orbit processing is really, kind of taking over.
So how does that happen? How did it change from the previous to now?
Yeah.
How did that change?
The ability to do it. Yeah, because we can kind of model, right? Yeah. And there's going to be some limits of it, obviously. I think, the whole idea of, data centers in space, I'm not completely sold on that from a physics standpoint, but we can come back to that if you want to. But once you're doing this computing layer, right, what you realize is, hey, I need a data model. I need a data model of my machine. I need a data model of all the storage that's going on these satellites. Let's say we'll talk about CubeSats. They're about this big, right?
Yeah.
And there's 68,000 of them or something like that, And so you think about storage, you say, do I need to send this information somewhere else? Does it need to communicate with another satellite? Does it need to communicate to the ground? That's all about data models, right? And so that's kind of like my wheelhouse in these projects. Like, I can help people build out data models in this space. But once you have data, just like we did with relational databases and things like that, what came next is analytics. Right? The ability to analyze the data and act on it, just like you want to act on the data, your business data to make sales decisions. Your satellite data you want to act on for safety, for navigation, for whatever, just being compliant with the regulations,
Yes.
And again, just like in the ground-based systems, once you have all this, then people start worrying about security. It's like, how do you keep this stuff secure up there? Like, I'm working on a project now where we want to take pictures of satellites that are already in orbit from a satellite and use that information for insurance companies to say, it's functioning properly, it's not functioning properly, it had an incident or something like that, right? But there's this weird sort of thing where it's like, the minute you can take a picture of another satellite, what else could you do?
Dude, yeah, it goes down. Yeah, it goes down.
There's some rabbit holes, and there's some rabbit holes of like, how are we going to mitigate security with operational concerns? I don't really have an answer yet. I'm fortunate, I think, to be living in the EU, where there's a lot of smart people in a sort of nice, I don't want to say hierarchical way, but there's a lot of top-down thinking that needs to be applied here, because you can't do it yourself, No. But if I look at my satellites that pass over my sensor outside, my antenna outside, 80% of them are Chinese satellites.
Oh,
yeah. And I don't know if it's because there were, it's a lot of popularity there, but it's like, different countries operate under different regulations. And there's no one authority saying, do this, don't do this.
Yeah, and that leads, but what I'm really curious about is I know with people like say this is our territory and so it's
Yeah.
countries, and then it's gone to land, air
Yeah.
in terms of airspace.
Yep.
But really, can we now say space? This is
Yeah.
now a space? Does that
I
make
don't
sense?
know.
It's like, well, how can someone claim to say, right, okay, you cannot have your satellites up here because
Yep.
we own space?
Yeah. And really, I mean, if you look at what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink, it's so the Starlink satellites, we call that a constellation, right? We have multiple satellites working together. And one of the things he wants to do with them is he wants to move them into a lower orbit. All of them.
Wow.
To me, that's analogous to trying to move all the rental cars from like SFO to, Oakland at rush hour and not have a single fender bender,
Yeah,
it's crazy. But I want to mention one more thing about space, which is going to drive a lot of this decision making, and that is space debris.
Yes.
Right. I've written some pretty cool stuff about space debris, and I'll share with your people the game that I wrote basically to basically play. You could play me a space debris person. The stuff that we track up there is typically stuff larger than about 10 centimeters.
Right.
Larger than 10 centimeters, we tend to know about it. It has what we call a NORAD ID. But the stuff that's smaller than that, a lot of it we don't know about. And of course, that's the most of what's up there is this small stuff. And something that's as small as 0.5 centimeters can take out a satellite.
Wow.
What can happen, and again, this is like the worst case scenario, is something called Kessler syndrome. And the movie Gravity did a great depiction of this, where something small happened, it created a debris field. The other things went through that debris field, which created more debris, and eventually it cascades to where nothing can be in orbit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So for me as well, and the listeners, what actually is space debris?
Yeah, it's everything from little chunks of metal that broke off of things or when things collided to large payloads that are no longer active, fuel tanks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It covers a pretty broad spectrum, but like I said, if it's larger than 10 centimeters, we can pick it up on radar. We kind of know that it exists. But how do we remove debris from space?
Great question.
And it's a huge problem, and it's not just a problem of technology, which it is. It's also a problem of will. It's analogous to climate change, right? Everyone knows that climate change is happening, except for a few crazy people, right? We know it's happening. We pretty much know why it's happening, right? We know pretty much where it's happening. We pretty much know what's going to happen if we don't do anything, and no one's doing anything. And that's kind of like space debris now. There are huge technological things that we should be focused on, but there's not a lot of consciousness around solving the problem at a planetary level.
So is it gonna your prediction is it gonna get worse or is it gonna get better?
I think it's going to get worse. Yeah, debris. I mean, just mathematically speaking, we use words like tipping points and things like that,
Yeah.
And I wrote this game where you can launch satellites and then you can remove the satellites safely. And then if they hit each other, it creates debris. And in almost every single way you play the game, you lose.
Oh, God.
Because debris creates more debris.
Yeah.
And it like a small 0.5 centimeter chip from something, and I'm not sure where it was from, took out a Spanish geosatellite a few months ago.
Wow.
It took out the solar panels.
And how much roughly, I don't know if you know this, I haven't got a clue, how much roughly is a satellite? I don't know if you know, put it in the spot, is it?
CubeSats, I think they run like 15 million, something like that, So, yeah, they're not cheap. It's not a cheap launch business at this point. It's getting cheaper.
Yeah. Like with everything. Like you mentioned at the beginning, your computer set was $3,000.
Exactly.
The thing what you get for $3,000 now in terms of a computer, you can get.
And they're getting smaller too, actually. So these cube satellites, they're usually about this big, right? And those are the dimensions of them. But there's also a new type they're called pico satellites, and they're like this big, little cubes. and they're really cool. I have a friend who's actually in the pico satellite business, and it's pretty interesting to see this stuff. But think about the problem of navigation. Like on Earth, we have air traffic control, right? And if you're flying an airplane, you agree to the rules of air traffic control, right? Yes. You can't just take. I fly airplanes, so I can't just like take my airplane.
Is there anything you can't do?
I can't tour with the Rolling Stones, Arn, but if you run into Mick over there in London, just remind him about me.
You're a writer. You've written books. You're a musician. You're extremely both left and right brain talented as well. You do your TED Talks. You're mentoring children. You're uplifting people in terms of this technology. What are you doing? I just need to pause for a moment for the people listening and just say what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much, and sorry for butting in.
No, it's okay. I will take it as a compliment. It's kind of been one of my mottos in life is just to be eclectic. Like the cooking school, literature school, and then becoming a techie. I'm already eclectic, right? That's already a pretty eclectic mix of things. But when it came to technology, like I've never taken a computer science class in my entire life. I've just self-taught on all of this stuff. Because that's the brain skill, right? That's the brain skill of getting it in there, and being able to, because I had this sort of visual ability to understand data, it really led to, I wanted to learn how to do it.
Yes.
I wanted to learn to be better at it. I wanted to be, the expert, Art. I wanted to be like, when you thought data, you thought Frank. Now there's a million Franks out there now, it's not like I'm the only data architect in the world.
Yeah.
But I've always tried to teach myself the things that were going to be valuable.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any background in orbital dynamics. Like how does the physics of space work? Like how do you make one spaceship, one satellite catch another in outer space? I got no idea. That's like voodoo to me, But I've had to learn some of it. I've had to learn some of it for my projects. I've had to learn sort of like, how do we know where things are today? And then how do we propagate where it's going to be 2 hours from now, right?
Yeah.
Now, the nice thing is, you mentioned it earlier too, is that with AI, you don't have to know all the details. I don't have to know all the physics of orbital mechanics. I'd love to learn how to do it on my slide rule, but that's a different story. But you do have to know what questions to ask. You do know what you need to know what to drive, and that's the story piece, right? And as people are using AI to do all this stuff, I encourage them, it's like, spend some time thinking about your stories, because that's what you're going to thing that's going to give you back some sort of a solution. But if you just focus on, nitty gritty stuff, or you don't really understand where you're going, you don't understand the what, and the why, you're not going to be successul.
Yeah. And you've hit the nail on the head. It's the curiosity and asking the right questions, almost like the childlike why, but why, and then who, when, what, and then how. The hows, the who's, the whys. It's those basic fundamental questions. One will ask you about, one will be giving you the answers about obviously the kind of the strategy. One will be giving you the answers about the time frame, like the when. And so if you're asking the right questions continuously, you'll get the right answers, or you'll find the right people around you to help you with that. So it's a phenomenal way to get to the right decision making to ensure we all excel in what we're doing. One thing that I want to do with you is a quick fire round for yourself.
Okay.
Just a quick bit of fun.
Okay.
So this is nothing strenuous. We're not talking about any quantum physics, quantum mechanics. We're going to do a quick fire round for yourself. Okay. So your favorite space mission?
I love the Artemis mission, the one that just finished up.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, I love Apollo too. Apollo 11, definitely, it's like, that's top of the list. But the reason I liked the Artemis mission so much is they included humanity in it. Like I touched on it earlier, space programs in the past were like all technical talk, it's like Roger 476, 476, 4765, Like, you know, it was, and these guys were like, woohoo, guess what? We fixed the toilet, you know. There was a joy to hearing how they talked about, like, they were fighting over who got to look out the window, you know. And in the old days, it was like, from 305 to 306, Michael Collins will look out the window, and then you will move back to your seat, buckle yourself in, and it's like, and there was this joy, and I almost want to say poetry to the way they were talking about space. And Chris Hadfield does a lot of that too. Chris Hadfield recorded on the International Space Station. He recorded a version of David Bowie's Space Oddity song.
Yes, I believe so.
And it's one of the most beautiful things ever made, really. You know, it's like, it's also the most expensive music video ever made, but you know, $3 million a minute or something like that, you know.
That is crazy. I didn't know that.
So I would say Apollo 11 definitely. But the last Artemis mission was really fun to watch also. So.
Right. Okay. Favorite satellite? Well, in fact, let's just, rather than me saying that, so satellite or telescope?
So because I live in Austria, I sort of had to pick a satellite to use as my test for all my demos. Right. And the name of one of the Austrian satellites is Pretty. You know,
so Pretty was that?
Pretty, yeah. Pretty.
Oh, right, okay.
It's the Pretty satellite, nice. You know, and I sort of feel like it's kind of my buddy now. You know, you know, definitely feel like I have a connection to it. I don't really get any visuals of it because it's a very small satellite, but I also love the International Space Station. I mean, just as a feat of engineering, I'll be really sad when it deorbits, put it that way.
Like all things, unfortunately, sometimes they come to an end. Favorite book?
Ulysses by James Joyce, definitely. Or Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, or Ulysses by James Joyce. Sorry, lit major. Lit major answers.
I'm writing this down so I can go check it out.
But, you know, I also read, you know, I'm reading 5 books at a time, always. I'm one of those people. And recent stuff I've read that I've been in love with, there's a British writer named Magnus Mills, and he writes these really charming little books. They're very quick and easy to read about normal people doing normal things in extraordinary language. You'll fall in love with him. It's like, I literally own everything he's ever written, you know, and really feel like he's doing something special in literature.
Love it.
Yeah. But asking me my favorite book is a tough question, honestly.
No problem. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
None of the above.
Hands down. Yeah.
Sorry? Coffee.
Hands down, coffee.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Early bird or night owl?
Insomniac, so a little of both.
Great answer. What's one misconception people have about working with data?
That you can just be mathematical about it, like algebra, right? And also that it requires years of education. I don't think it does. I think I feel like when I went to my clients in my early consulting career, if I was going to build, I built a project for a guy once, for example. He wanted to track signage inside of hospitals, digital signage. Right? It's a very complicated thing. It's like, you know, this doctor to go here, you have to go left here, you have to go right here, the arrows, all of it has to work together, right?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to build a database to do that. And what I did was I invited him to my house for a weekend. And I said, what we're going to do this weekend is we're going to cook. And we're going to talk about the stories behind your project. And I'm going to teach you how I talk about data. I'm going to teach you my rhetoric for how I talk about what is an attribute, what is a field, what is a relation, all that kind of, this is back in my relational days. And what I wanted to do was teach him enough so that I could be more productive when I talk to him, you know? And so I think the biggest misconception is that it requires tons of education. It doesn't really, it just requires, you know, being in the right room with the right person.
Correct. Love it. If you could analyze data from anywhere in the solar system, where would you choose?
I'm fascinated about Mercury for some reason. I think that the physics of Mercury, like how it doesn't orbit the same and things like that. I mean, it doesn't spin the same and things like that is fascinating. Now, one side of it is, you know, right next to the sun, and the other side is, you know, completely frozen, you know. I think that's a really interesting sort of place. But honestly, I think Earth has enough interest for me.
There's so much going on here now. We're not even scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I know there's space curious, but even the oceans, we don't even
Yeah.
explore the oceans enough to even know what's going on.
I think the moons of
itself.
Jupiter are also super interesting from a biological standpoint, a potentially biological standpoint.
Yeah.
And of course, I love the Mars stuff. I think I watch how we landed this fucking thing on Mars. I was just like, how did we even do that? You know, they like dropped it down on ropes and let it. What? And then the drones flying around. I'm like, that's crazy. You know.
Yeah. And who knows? You know, I know the mission to Mars is very current topics of conversation.
Yeah.
But who knows? We may actually be doing stuff on there quite at scale, automated at the moment, and we'll find. No, the civilians will find out after the fact.
There's some interesting stuff. There's a great series of sci-fi books by Kim Stanley Robinson. Red Mars, Blue Mars, and Green Mars. It's a trilogy.
Blue and green.
Yeah, and Kim Stanley Robinson, terrific writer, and it's a great series about sort of the colonization of Mars by humans.
Yeah, so it's almost like with movies, they normally always tell you what's going to happen before it happens. So we shall see. I'm looking forward to more discoveries on this planet when they let us know. So we've gone through quite a bit. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that, before we close off, anything that you want to mention that you feel that I've not asked or we've not touched on before we close?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say is that if someone wants to get more connected to space stuff, right? A lot of your constraints and your opportunities in space are going to be based on where you are, right? If you're in the US, it's a different world than when you're here, right? If you're in the Netherlands, it's different than when you're down here in Austria, you know? And so get connected to your as local as you can space things, but don't think because, you know, like it's not like a big name like an Airbus or something like that nothing is happening. You know, one of the things I did when I first moved to Austria is I would say 5 or 6 medium-sized cities in this little valley that I live in. And I would drive around with my notebook and I would write down the names of companies that I saw. And then I would go over to the door and I'd write down what other companies are in this building, and not just the name on the outside of the building, like who else is here. And what you realize is there's a whole subsystem of people doing interesting things around you, but they're just not bragging about it. They're just quietly doing it, you know? And I think that for the space program, those are the people that I want to talk to. You know, I want to talk to a person that makes ceramic bearings, which are important thing in space, right? So what do? You go to a bicycle manufacturer. You say, hey, what are you making your bearings out of? You know? A spring manufacturer, someone who makes, you know, titanium springs, someone doing 3D printing, you know, all these kind of like ancillary type things. And look, I describe it as like, look behind the curtain. You know? And I think that is a skill that a lot of people don't really have, you know, to be able to like look around you. Like I can look around me and I can see like 8 different companies, and not all of them do I know what they do, you know?
Yeah. And the thing I say now to other people is curiosity will help you. But even if you think, oh, I don't know what to look for, there's no excuse, because you can just go on ChatGPT or Claude and you could just say, okay, I want to be curious about space. This is where I live. Can you give me some companies in the area so I can just have a think about it now? But then that leaves a challenge in itself, what you've mentioned, the analog versus the digital. So what you're talking about is the analog, and I love it, because the reason why I smiled when you mentioned that's my old sales business development days before like all the mass internet. You would jump in your car, you would ride to a business center, a business park, and then you would look at the plaque at the front of the place, and you would just write down all the companies, And then you'd walk into the office and just say, "Oh, hi, I've noticed that your company's here. Oh, I'm just checking who's the head of HR or who's the CFO or and it's that curiosity. And unfortunately, a lot of that has been lost, even in kind of my section in sales, because now, you've got your mobile phone. I can literally get so much leads, and leads are auto generated to me anyway. So that analog side of it is unfortunately gone. Not gone, but
it's diminished.
You just have to care, I guess.
Yeah.
And
but there's also a cultural piece, Arne, you have to be careful of. Is like, for example, Austrians and Germans, they don't do cold calls. It's considered rude. I bought a book actually once called How to Do Business with Germans. I swear to God, if I'd read that book before I moved here, I never would have moved here. So, right. And the different approach is like meetups or entrepreneur groups or hackathons or, and get somebody to introduce you where you want to be. It's for Austria, particularly for Aalborg, where I live, it's everything. It's like, now that I've been here long enough, people are asking me to introduce you to people, but it's like getting an introduction to someone and in a non-salesy way, like somebody I want to meet who's got a robotics company, like, I just want to have coffee. What are you doing? Now language can be a bit of a barrier sometimes, but my German's, I have a t-shirt that says life's too short to learn German. but I do find that people do speak enough English here to get me by.
And again, what you've said is, I know we're way over time, but what you said is great as well about the kind of, depending where you are, which country, state, town.
Be culturally aware, basically.
And what you touched on as well is ask them questions. Don't be talking about yourself. You need to be curious about that person, what you went back to, the who's, the where's, the what's, the why's, the how's, the when's, and that will get the person speaking more. And then you know a lot about the business, and they'll be like, well, they're curious about my business, so they're curious about the company, or they're curious about the technology or the industry or whatever you're asking the question about. And that will spark more of a natural conversation versus, this is what I want and how can you help me and what can you do for me?
And also, I would say the follow on it would be read the room. Like learn. Like my ex-wife was a psychologist, and she taught me about like neuro-linguistic programming stuff. And I don't completely buy it, all of it, but there are definitely signs that someone is listening to you and are not listening to you. And someone is interested in what you're saying, they're not interested in what you're saying. And learning that sort of soft skill is just for any time you're doing pitching, salesy type stuff. My dad was a salesman, my biological dad, he was a salesman. And he taught me this thing where it's like, where you shake someone's hand, say their name. And my dad knew the name of like every waitress between San Diego and San Francisco. He could like go to any restaurant because that was his territory. And it's like remembering people's names, super important. And really learn how to sell yourself. It's super important.
Well, Frank, it's been absolutely amazing.
A whirlwind. We could probably do like parts 2 and 3.
We definitely need to, because we can go for a proper deep dive into the TED Talk. We've not even touched on the guitars hanging in your background, well lit. And you're just a phenomenal person. Your focus, your dedication, your care. I always use the word care because to me it's a doing word. And you can tell you care because you're doing a tremendous lot.
Love. I would go further than care. I think it's love. I love what I do.
Exactly.
It's definitely love to me.
So it's been an absolute pleasure, and let's keep in contact and let's keep